Start now. I'm going to start the webinar. We'll start to see some attendees come in, and then we'll get the live stream going. Let's see. Hey, everybody, looks like we're starting to get some attendees into the room. It's Mike Cadju. I'm just going to turn on the live streaming stuff, and then we'll get going. I got a really exciting event for you today that I'll talk about in a second. Just let me get this live streaming stuff up, and then we're off to the races, okay? That looks like that, and that looks like that, and we'll do some of that as well. It's always fun when you're trying to be the host and the live streaming coordinator on events like this. So anyway, going to get some more people coming into the room here, and at the same time, we're going to start some live streaming. As always, Tina is behind me in the control center paying attention. We just kicked on the live streaming. Tina's going to tell us when we're live and on LinkedIn, although it looks like the feeds are up. So as soon as Tina can tell us that, we'll get started and we'll get the content going for today. I am really excited about today because today I think is the first time that we've actually had a chance to meet and speak with someone from the finance team, what we consider to be our stakeholders with Yvonne from Webflow. So I'm really excited about that. I'm gonna do a little bit of housekeeping. Tina, are we live yet on LinkedIn?
Yes. Yep, you're live.
We're live on LinkedIn, cool. All right, so everybody who is new or maybe new to this, or if you're watching us on LinkedIn Live, I can't see you, but Tina can. And then at the same time, attendees here in the room, if you are attending in the room, the way we typically operate this is we do not hold questions till the end. If you have questions, just throw them into the chat functionality. You do not need to use the Q&A functionality here. We kind of keep it informal. So really quickly, if you're an attendee inside of the Zoom room, or what I like to call the live studio audience, feel free to chat where you're from, where you're dialing in from today. That'd be great. And then we'll jump in. Today's topic: procurement strategies for CFOs and finance directors. This is awesome for me. And we've got Yvonne from Webflow. Yvonne, thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule. I know that procurement and sourcing is part of your day job, but not all of your day job. And so thank you for breaking off a piece of time for us here at the Zipper Lane to talk about strategies for CFOs and finance directors. Amazing perspective here with Yvonne, because he is in a hypergrowth technology MarTech based company, and they're basically building the plane while they're flying it at the same time. So really interesting. Yvonne, thank you very much. Great to see you.
Great to be here, Mike. Really excited for our chat.
Yeah, and for those of you who don't know, Yvonne was on the slopes about 2 days ago, and I caught him in the pre-chat, and I'm glad to see that he's back at home base. So Yvonne, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, a little bit about your role and your position as a director of finance, a VP of finance, and then tell us a little bit about Webflow as well. I want everybody to kind of get the roundabout idea so that we can enrich this conversation.
Yes, sounds great. So I'm at Webflow. So I've been here for about 2 years. I started my career in accounting with PwC and EY here in Silicon Valley, where I still live. Then I did about 5 years there, and I jumped into the startup world almost by accident. Wasn't planning on doing that, but jumped into, was the first finance hire at a company called SmugMug, where I spent close to a little over 7 years. Built up finance function there and a number of different teams and initiatives and disciplines. And so decided to do it one more time, jumped back into starting things from scratch. Right before the pandemic started at a Webflow, was the first finance hire here, and have since grown the team from 0 to we're about a team of 30 now. It's comprised of accounting, strategic finance, business operations, also legal reports to finance, and IT as well right now. So pretty cross-functional view of the business. Run a lot of other things as it happens at startups. I started when we were about 150 people. We've grown to be close to 500 people now, and close to doubling every year. So what Webflow does is we are a modern way to build for the web. So we are a visual development platform that lets people build their websites and web apps with no code. So no code platform.
Yeah, which is it's a topic inside of procurement, to be honest with you. So a lot of no code or low code solutions being thrown at procurement and technology sourcing professionals right now. It's a double-edged sword, right? One of them is it's great because, hey, we don't have a lot of the overhead of coders and we can do almost a self-service concept there a little bit. But then at the same time, also lends itself a little bit towards, hey, the marketing department can now just, spin something up with no code and get a project going without us in procurement and sourcing knowing a little bit about it. So there's pros and cons to it. Certainly one of the big trends right now that's being talked about inside of Procurement Foundry as well, which is interesting. I literally just talked about this at a conference last week. I said, hey, one of the emerging trends that you need to be thinking about is no code, low code. So thank you for that. What I think is amazing is the growth that you're experiencing. So you're what I would call a MarTech. I don't know if you're a startup because you got a little bit of time underneath your wings now, but you're in hypergrowth. I mean, 2x, 3x, right? And so you have an amazing perspective on how to build this all out. And I think what's interesting about this, and Yvonne and I were talking about this in the pre-chat, was Yvonne doesn't have a procurement department right now. Yvonne is the procurement department, correct?
Yep.
So you don't have any, you are the dedicated resource in addition to building up the finance and having all these other folks responsible to you. So amazing perspective here to talk about what some of the strategies are that you deploy in order to be able to give this the due diligence that it needs, but at the same time, juggling that with all the other things. So let's talk about some basics for a second. I'm really interested in your position. We're chock full of procurement and sourcing people, as you can imagine, on the supply chain side. So people who are building combine harvesters all the way up to tech startups like yourself and procurement organizations inside of highly technical companies and everything in between. Let's start with some basics. So as a finance guy, right? And I say that with all the affection in the world because I've been in back office operations with finance guys for a long, long time. I can speak finance, but I'm not a finance guy. Very much like from a technology perspective, I can speak geek, but I'm not an IT guy, right? So from your perspective as a financial mindset, as opposed to a sourcing mindset, when I say procurement and sourcing, what's your definition? What do you think of? How do you wrap your head around the concept of procurement and sourcing?
Yeah, I have to often explain this too, what we're doing when we're building new policies. Also in the startup, of course, when you're starting up different functions, you have to train people, you have to train the founders, why and what we do. So I use very simple word. I use the word buying when I think of procurement. It is buying things for the company. Just like when we think of sales, we think of selling your product. I think of procurement as something that's buying things to help run the business. So that's simply how I explain it, and then we obviously can go into the nuance of what procurement can mean. What's the difference between procurement and strategic sourcing, for example, in software? Very common to have the two team work together or be under the same umbrella or separate. So that's how I typically explain it. That's how I think about it in my head as well.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I know we talked a little bit about financial discipline, right? And being able to facilitate financial discipline, both in the finance arena, but then procurement and sourcing actually help contribute to financial discipline as well, right? So there's an element of cost management, there's an element of process control and things like that factor into your mindset associated with what your expectations are as you're starting to build out something and provide a service to the rest of the people inside of your organization.
Yeah. I think the question that comes up, especially when talking about startups and talking about starting procurement function within an organization, first question is what is procurement, and the second question is why now? My CEO asked me because we have the headcount this year to start procurement function at Webflow, and my answer to that is right now is a great time to establish a good culture of buying, good discipline. Because it is much easier to do it now than to do it when you're 1,000 people, 2,000 people, and the spend is in hundreds of millions of dollars, because you've already established how you do things. And so From my perspective, since one of my key roles is to maintain financial discipline within the company, procurement is one of the key pillars within that, because we're constantly buying things, we're constantly implementing tools, and in the growth, your contracts are also expanding, so you often have to renegotiate things before they're over. So my point to that is that I'm going to start this now, and we'll see results years down the road when we do have a really solid process in place, and we also in the contracts that make sense for the business.
Yeah, that's a really interesting idea, right? Which is, okay, so we're in hypergrowth mode, and this thing is flying. We've got PE or VC behind us, right? And we're growing 2x, 3x, 5x, 10x. But at the same time, there's this concept of, okay, costs and controlling our third-party spend might not be as relevant right now as revenue growth, but it is there, right? We don't want, drunken sailors walking the streets buying whatever they want. And it gets really tricky when you're in the space that you're in, which is technology development and technology management, because Lord knows it's easy for people to spin up cloud, services and find sub providers and things like that. But at the same time, it's really interesting that at your levels, you're already starting to think about what type of behaviors and habits do I want this organization to have? So you're starting almost teaching, and I want to say this with all the affection I can, teaching the kids how to behave the right way, so that when you actually get to maturity of, hey, I've got $500 million in third-party spend, I'm not trying to teach them how to behave properly, because I've already been laying down that groundwork along the way, right?
Yeah.
So you and it's a balancing act, right? I mean, we talked about this a little bit. So inside of Procurement Foundry, we have our finger on the pulse of what's happening inside of Procurement Foundry all the time. And from a procurement perspective, the current the most important priorities right now for the procurement people inside of Procurement Foundry is talent. So I hate to say this, my friend, but as you start to staff up your organization, one of the biggest challenges you'll have is going to be finding good talent to actually build out that procurement organization, to take some of the stress and responsibility off your plate, because there are some talent wars that are taking place right now. It's the number one priority inside of Procurement Foundry and its membership right now is finding good talent. Number two is risk mitigation associated with contracts that people are signing for a number of reasons, whether that's cyber risk or vendor lock-in risk or financial risk associated with increasing costs, or a whole bunch of different risks associated with that. The third one is supplier diversity inclusion. And the fourth one, believe it or not, inside of Procurement Foundry right now is actually cost optimization and reduction. So I'm interested in hearing your opinion on that, as when you look at it from a financial lens, knowing what is important to the procurement people of the world right now, how does that align with what you're trying to build out in the beginning, early stages of building this architecture for your community? I mean, for your organization.
Yeah, no, I think the priorities are very similar, and all the conversations I've had with leaders at our company or leaders at other companies. I was just at the Warriors game last night at a company box for one of our vendors, and that was the whole conversation. Talent. Yeah. How do you hire? It's the hardest thing right now, and in the growth stage startup, it is the biggest thing. It's what determines the winners from losers, if you can hire well and if you keep the bar. I think the other thing, and that's to your point earlier, we don't think much about costs when we're thinking about growth. When all that we're thinking about is let's establish, let's have the product market fit, let's hire the right people, and let's grow, because there's advantages to growing faster and getting to the market faster. But this is goes back to what I'm talking about here, is that companies that are disciplined, that can do that with discipline, are the companies that will stay here long term, because they can play the game. Because what we've seen, the shift in the market in the last couple of years, the companies that were doing best, that both had a really strong growth, good unit economics, but also had path to profitability, even if they were not immediately profitable. Then we saw the shift with the pandemic, that profitability went out the window, because again, we felt like, okay, this is the time, especially for companies that were doing well as a result of the pandemic. And we're seeing that shift now in the market, with the markets being in volatility. The public companies and the private companies are now seeing that as well. Profitability again matters. So investors and the founders, they really want to understand, okay, how can we exist? Because we don't know how much longer we'll have the free flow of capital. It's drying out already with fewer IPOs, fewer financing rounds. So you really have to look at that and have the discipline and kind of have the triangle of all three, where you can grow really good talent, but also have the path of profitability.
That's interesting that you say that. I'm going to go off script for a second, even though I told you what we were going to talk about, because you're hitting on something that's really, really interesting. Procurement people, and this is something that again, we're talking about a lot inside of Procurement Foundry, is going from a cost optimization, hey, this is old school, the way procurement's been run for years, right? Is drive the cost, negotiate, pound the suppliers, to you need to be much more strategic, and you need to be thinking about how can procurement and supply chain and sourcing professionals be valuable at the top end, at the revenue generation or revenue protection or margin improvement or things like that, right? So I think it's really interesting that you're actually spinning that cycle up and talking about that, because that's fairly new to procurement people. But I think you're in a unique position where in a hypergrowth where you don't have the long-term, you're not inhibited by the long-term legacy of the existing processes. You can already start to build out your program and think about, okay, we need to be able to weigh cost savings against enhancing margins, enhancing profitability, and creating strategic market differentiation in your supplier base, right?
That's right. That's right. Yeah, the way I think about it comes down to speed of the business. Is what we're doing actually accelerating the business and making it more sustainable, or is it accelerating? Because sometimes that's when we talk about the opportunity cost of signing a deal, negotiating something. Sometimes you could go a few extra cycles and get the best possible deal, but that may slow everything down.
Yeah.
I know at Webflow, when I started, we had less than 20 teams. We now have 10 departments. Each department has 3-4 sub teams. So we're talking about 30-40 different teams, which all potentially need their own set of tools or one tool that unites them all. So it becomes very challenging. And I remember when we started, for example, enterprise sales team 2 years ago, when you started from ground up, they need basic tools too. They need Salesforce. They need a commissions tool.
Right.
They need all kinds of other things, especially in the virtual world too, where you're selling in a different way. And you can say, well, we'll get you the best tools in the long-term contracts, but it's going to take us 3-4 months. Or you could say, you could have your tools a month from now or 2 weeks from now and can hit the ground running. So these are the questions you have to ask yourself in my role all the time. How fast do we need this, and what's the optimal terms for the speed of the business?
I like the idea of asking yourself about acceleration versus deceleration, right? We talk about it a lot, like you mentioned already, the speed of business. But we call it inhibiting versus not inhibiting the ability to be able to deliver. And when you're talking about teams like sales teams or engineering teams, the biggest thing I think is a concern is weighing the balance between, okay, I need to make sure I get the sourcing element of this right. But at the same time, every day that we don't have Salesforce in place for our sales team, we're losing $100,000, $200,000, $1 million in revenue, right? Every week. So, I mean, how much do I want to spend haggling out to the nth degree the liability clauses associated with a contract, or maybe even the widget price, when the reality is that if I would have deployed it a month earlier, I would have paid for all the contract savings that I would have negotiated out of the deal, right? And then at the same time, so you've got the economic aspect of that, but then at the same time, you get the relational aspect of it to worry about too, right? Because the head of sales is looking at you like, hey man, you're slowing me down, right? So now you're creating I don't know, I don't want to call them bad relationships, but certainly not starting off on the right foot, right? With some of these, I mean, the marketing department comes to you and they want to buy some things, and you're like, okay, I got to be the gatekeeper here, but at the same time, I'm going to be doing business with this marketing team for the next 5 years. Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So we're gonna
and there's another element that I see from my chair is, do we have the most optimal set of tools, because they can also balloon. If you're going too fast and you're just buying everything that your departments ask you without thinking how all these tools interact with each other, then you end up with we call it tech debt. Just like in engineering, they talk about the code debt and technical debt. We talked about buying debt and having too many tools in place. And so you also have to approach that holistically. And finance department, I think, better than anybody has the view into that from perspective of P&L, from tools, etc., because these things come and hit our billing department all the time, accounts payable. And so if we also don't stop and look at that and say, why are we buying Jira and Asana and Monday.com at the same time? Should we talk about that and what that would do to the organization, even if the cost is within the budget?
Yeah, that's understandable, right? I remember a while ago when I first started my consulting practice, I think I told you this example where I got brought into the finance director's office and they said, hey, we're looking at a couple of financial planning and analysis tools. And I said, okay, well, I just finished the analysis of your third-party spend and your vendor spend. You already own 6 of them. So listen, I'm a procurement guy. I'm a professional shopper, right? So I'm happy to go shop and find you another financial planning analysis tool. There's only like 1 or 2 you don't currently own. I think we should probably tap the brakes and ask, why are we buying a 7th financial planning and analysis tool versus having this? And I like what you called it, tech debt, right? Which I call it shelfware. Or that's kind of the legacy term for it, which is, hey, we bought all these things. We're using 3% of all of them. You know, you could probably get away with Excel if you actually knew what you were doing in this space. With Excel, you already bought it from Microsoft Office. We don't need all these other 7 tools because we're only using 3% of them as well, right? So there's that part of the strategic sourcing process, which is, hey, let me give you a little bit of strategy and vision into what I'm seeing, right? And I think that in some cases, you're at an advantage because you're in the finance department and you have access to the data so well. It's at your fingertips, right? Whereas procurement has to reach out to larger procurement organizations. It's getting a little bit better now with the deployment of some technology solutions and spend analytics tools that are in place, and process automation tools like Zip, by the way, which sponsors the Zipper Lane. So thank you to them. But it's also having your ability to be able to start this off from a finance perspective gives it a lot of credibility, because you can make sure that as you start to populate your procurement organization, you make sure that they have access to the things that you already have access to, as far as visibility into the spend and tech debt, which I think the first time I've ever heard it called that, but I like it, by the way. It's just burnt dead money on debt associated with technology that you bought that you're not optimizing usage of. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, that's exactly how I see it.
So my next question was around, how do you balance the need for cost and containing risk without inhibiting the business flow? So I know that there's that inner challenge of, okay, and we talked a little bit about not inhibiting and working at the speed of business, but at the same time, it's an inner struggle for you around cost value versus risk, right? I mean, do you factor risk into what you're working on when you're at this side and when you're moving this fast?
Yeah, all the time. Because there's the risk of business slowing down, but there's also the risk of business going away altogether, especially in this environment where everything's online and everything's digital. And so we actually here at Webflow build our risk and security team first, and have established things that we need for SOC 2 compliance as a business. And so they look at things that are buying as one of the first parties together with legal. And then by the time it gets to my desk, they've already vetted things from the security perspective. So the way we have it set up, I personally don't think about risk as much in my role, because it was already pre-vetted by the teams. But the overall risk to the business is certainly needs to be considered at the outset, in the beginning of the process. So and then costs, at the end of the day, that is what I look at, scrutinize a lot, because it comes to what we just talked about earlier comes to the speed. Or have we moved too fast? Have we, what's the right balance here of cost versus speed versus what that will do as a return to the business? And so that's the framework that I'm usually using, the sequence.
We got a question inside of the chat room. I want to jump on it. Dave asked a question. How do you frame your vision on buying when your business needs, how do you frame your vision on buying when your business needs to meet big growth goals? How do you frame your vision on buying when your business needs, when your business needs to meet big growth goals? So how do you do that when the growth goals is so big?
Yeah, it's a balance. I think it's a balance. Generally speaking, you're always, analogy that I use a lot to explain what we do in finance is we're building the train tracks for the train that's moving very fast. And we all have a goal to build the train tracks ahead of the train. Unfortunately, sometimes you build it just ahead or maybe even a little bit behind as the trail is starting to come off. So you ask yourself that. So when choosing tools, for example, we're saying, okay, what needs will it serve? Will it solve the problems we need today? Will also solve the problems we need tomorrow. And that's sometimes the trade-off. So whenever we think about ERP, for example, or large systems like HR system for the whole business, so this could help now, but a year from now, we're going to be implementing another system. And is going to create a problems for us down the road. So these are some of the questions that you have to ask yourself, and cross-functionally, you have to think about it, whether sometimes it's worth spending more, especially if you have the capital and the balance sheet to spend, but other times it's not. You just think, well, this will be a good plug for the next 2 years, but we have to think about what's the next version of the product that we need. So these are some of the questions I ask myself whenever I hear about the new need in the business.
That's really interesting. I like the idea of being able to weigh the short term versus the long term, because when you're talking about a company that has 500 employees today, but you might be buying a 3-year software agreement, right? A subscription to a software development platform or a Salesforce.com. I mean, you're buying Salesforce.com right now for 35 to 50 people in a Salesforce organization. I don't know how big the sales team is at Webflow, but I'm guessing it's somewhere in that space, right?
Yep.
And it's probably geographically kind of locked to the United States, or at least it's starting out that way. You have to think, okay, 3 years from now, my sales team is projected to be at 500 to 1,000 people, and it's projected to be global versus just regional. So I have to buy solutions and contract those solutions with the end game in mind, but the flexibility to be able to either slow it down or even speed it up in some cases. So where it was 50 and now it's going to be 250, realistically, it might need to be 500. You're not really sure, right? So I think probably to go back to the title of today's program, which is Procurement Strategies for CFOs, and I'm writing them down as we're hitting them all. One of them probably is flexibility and evaluation of your vendor solution providers to be able to fit your business need today and tomorrow, right?
Yep.
I'm just curious, in that space, when you're contracting with them, now legal reports to you as well, right? Do you have an opportunity with some of the suppliers to be able to say, hey, listen, here's the deal. We're in hypergrowth right now. I don't have a dedicated procurement team. I need a clause in here that says at 18 months, at the midlife of this contract, we need to sit down and reevaluate where we are, because we could do another round, we could do a merger and acquisition, we could do God knows what is 24 months away when you're moving this fast. Do you put terms and conditions into some of those to keep the flexibility there?
Yeah, very, if we can. Sometimes you negotiate with Salesforce, you're not going to have much leverage.
Right.
But where we can, we do definitely ask for that. I'm generally, if I'm given an option 1 year to 3 year term, I just don't know what we're going to need 3 years from now. And if the difference is less than 20% in the discount, then I will always do 1 year deal and then reevaluate. And we're starting to see a lot more in that space, just because there's so much new software that's coming up, and the businesses are growing fast, but also volatile. There's volatility to the growth now in this sort of what we may be calling post-pandemic world now. I hope it is a post-pandemic world. So that's we're definitely looking to that, and then it also comes to customer success teams at those businesses that even in the buying process, we're evaluating, okay, how are they? Because we know that things can change. Things can change fast, and the needs can change, and we want to work with partners that are flexible and are able to meet the needs of the business. Sometimes the needs of the business means we're actually going to end the contract early. We're going to terminate because, especially as you know, what we're seeing too, a big shift is usage-based pricing. And if the contract is very heavily weighted on usage-based pricing, we get our usage down to zero because we use the new tool. The contract is not there anymore. So all the vendors are really care about that. So those are some of the things that I think about.
Yeah, that just it makes logical sense to me. I mean, it seems like being able to contract for fitness for purpose, right? I think.
Yep.
Knowing what, so if I had to put a procurement strategy in place for CFOs and finance directors that are listening to us right now, probably what I would summarize that as is, hey, you got to know your position now, and you got to know what your likely position is 3 years from now. And if you can't get a really good discount, be very careful about locking yourself in, because it will potentially create tech debt, which is you're going to be paying for something you might not even be using, because your engineering team, if you're in the technology space, for example, like Yvonne is, your engineering team might move off of a platform and move to a whole nother platform because somebody created something with other whiz bang functionality, and they're just abandoning it because things are changing in development platforms. I mean, you're in the no code business. No code, low code didn't exist 4 or 5 years ago, right? Or at least it was in its budding infancy. So the fact that is the business, just the business model that you're in alone, proves long-term viability of coding and engineers and development teams and things like that. You don't want to be in a 10-year agreement with a third-party outsourced development team overseas, when now you've got a no-code environment and your marketing team can be building web apps on the fly, right?
Yeah, if we learn anything, I think in the last 2 years, it's you have to have flexibility to life, but also just in the business, you need to have it, because none of us really know what the world will look like 6 months from now, 2 years from now. And so as a result, you have to give yourself a lot of optionalities.
Dave asked a question: does your company deploy a certain decision-making framework, such as RACI or Rapid or things like that? If so, how has the framework helped making business decisions?
Yeah, we do combination of both. I think both of these frameworks. There's a constant question that we ask ourselves is who's the DRI, the directly responsible individual on the project, which means that's the ultimate decision maker, and then who's driving and who's supporting that process. So that's very helpful, because sometimes it's actually not clear, especially when you're buying something that's very cross-functional and it affects everybody. And also it's important to have post-transaction, post-contract completion, because that person will also be in charge of implementation. And so very important to know who will see the success of that investment or not. And who's ultimately responsible, because a year from now, when we're doing the planning analysis and we're looking at, okay, where do we invest more? Where do we invest less? You go back to that person and say, is that met the needs? Did you seeing ROI or not? And if not, then what's the next path?
Yeah. And God forbid, but if they left, who was they handed off to, so that they're now they're the DRI, right?
Exactly. That's actually, Mike, it goes back to what we talked about in the beginning, talent. That's another thing that is very often a question in the interview process when we're hiring people. They're asking us, what's the tools I'm going to be working with? And we're asking them, what are the tools they're familiar with on the other side? Because the challenge with hiring is the onboarding and ramp. So you generally want people to get going by the time they hit their 6 months, sometimes 12 months, depending on the department and role, et cetera. Sometimes you want them to get going within the month. And if you see that they're familiar with what you're using and what you're invested into, that oftentimes means sooner ramp and sooner productivity, which means that they're sooner contributing to the business. And so that's another part of strategy, the overall global enterprise technology strategy that we have to think about in the hypergrowth mode.
So listen, you're a busy guy. You got multiple hats, right? You've got a number of different key critical departments reporting into you. How do you manage your time? How do you manage process optimization? I mean, you've deployed, I know you're a client of Zip, and you've deployed Zip as a process automation tool associated with your sourcing requirements. How do you manage your time? And let's talk a little bit about process automation and the types of tools that you look for to help you.
That's actually a really good question. I love the fact that you use the hats analogy. And because when we were launching Zip to our team, we had a Zoom all team meeting for the whole company. We literally, the whole finance department, which was our finance leader, our legal leader, our IT leader, wore different hats as a bit of a funny joke. And that stuck with people, that you have to look at it from different perspectives and consider different angles. So what spurred implementation for us was there was a period of 2 months when on my drive home, I would often be on the phone with one of the leaders that was getting upset why the contractor was getting was waiting on 6 months, six to 8 weeks to get contract signed and started on the project, or an agency or software tool. And I would often be the middle party that's trying to reconcile the different interests. And I just realized that the workflow of trying to get that all reconciled on Slack without a really good platform was just not scalable, because I could probably spend every night on my drive home or my walk with the dog in the evening when I'm working from home, trying to mitigate things and trying to reconcile things. So I think it's very important to have as much visibility and as clear of a workflows for the process as possible, and especially as they evolve. Because in the beginning, you don't have a lot of process. You have a founder that's approving everything, then you have eventually finance department, then you can have security department, again, a legal department. So you have multiple parties now waiting in on the process. And if they're not well coordinated, like an orchestra, then it all goes south, and it all goes wrong directions, and you cannot navigate that train.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, probably one of the most important things for you as a high growth company is onboarding talent as quickly as possible in the development, engineering, and operations side of the equation. And when your HR department needs an employee onboarding tool, which you need to look at it like we've talked about already. You need to buy something for today, but you need to buy something when you're a 4,000 person shop as well. It needs to integrate and become your HR system of record. It needs to integrate into your ERP system from payroll and benefits management and things like that. But at the same time, you're trying to build this thing, and it's going to be in parallel viewed by, it's a critical system, so it has to go through your information security audit. It's got to go through legal. It's got to go. So being able to automate through technologies such as Zip, right, to be able to parallel process things and get things to market faster and make smarter decisions. That, to me, from what you're saying, is a critical procurement strategy for CFOs and finance directors who don't necessarily have a procurement organization, so they can just go, all right, listen, I got a team of 10 people, they handle this for me. Right? Okay, cool.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
And I'm one of the final approvers on all those things, and often the final approver, and it really helps me to have visibility. What was the process? What were the comments? What were some of the pain points? What were some of the new clauses we introduced into the process? I can take a quick look, and within 2 minutes know if we followed the guidelines, if we followed our diligence on the process or not. And what were the shortcuts we took? And then I think, well, these were maybe potentially shortcuts worth taking, or we can go back and say, okay, that's let's look into it deeper.
So a couple of comments, because people are using chat and using QA, and we're getting information in from the folks on LinkedIn. So thank you very much for the commentary from the folks on LinkedIn. Thank you for the engagement inside of the room here. Scott inside of the queue says, more of a comment, says, best to negotiate upfront future quantities and volume brands with improved pricing, aka build bands out of utilization. Salesforce will do this, by the way. This is what he says. Salesforce will do this as well as other vendors with high growth clients. Not good to do under good faith in the future, as prices will get higher, right? And not only that, now we've got inflation at 7, 8, 9%. Your price is going up whether if you're paying $1 today and you're paying $1 6 months from now, you're actually paying $1.07 6 months from now. And if you don't understand that, go find your finance person. If you're a procurement friend, the finance people, this is just dyed in the fabric of their knowledge. So you technically would need to negotiate a 7% discount just to offset inflation at that time. Jim asked a question, and I want to jump to it. 1 second. Jim says, how do you utilize, and this is a good segue in, because I wanted to talk a little bit about the fact that you are a finance professional. I think, and we talked a little about this in the pre-read, and I got some glimpses of it. As a person who's a finance person first and a sourcing procurement person, probably third or fourth in your mindset, do you, just by the nature of the fact that you came out of finance and you've been in finance for the last 10, 15 years, do you naturally see things that we as traditional procurement people don't? And here's what I mean by that. Sales and use tax, right? And I think we talked about sales and use tax when we first talked to each other last week, and you said you've got a background in this. Procurement people don't necessarily think about sales and use tax, right? But sales and use tax can be a huge bear trap especially for software companies and for large organizations that are multi-geographically based, where if you're centrally buying things like that, you don't know about use tax and the fact that, hey, I'm buying this in New York, but I got a bunch of people in Silicon Valley. Software is non-taxable in California, but it's taxable at 9.25% in New York State, which is where my accounts payable department is, right? So are you naturally at an advantage on certain areas of finance because you come out of the finance world and you're running a procurement organization? Like, do you just, is it inflation? Is it cost of capital? Is it sales and use tax? Things that you think about. And then I'm going to get to this question because he talks about utilizing lease financing as a mechanism to offset risk. So I want to talk a little bit about that as well.
Yeah, I think I tend to think so, and I hope so. That's because in finance, we tend to think that we're the most cross-functional view of the business, because we do work with every department. We deploy capital to every department, approve budgets, do financial planning every year, and we also deal with things like financing. So I often think no one really worries about that, maybe except the founders, is what are some of the things that are going to come up in due diligence when you're doing the next round of financing? Because those terms can also make or break the business if you get good terms. Sometimes you don't need financing, and so you think about, okay, you're running a bootstrap business or a business that runs on retained earnings, and so that could be a very different financial discipline that you have to balance with all of that. So absolutely, you have to kind of educate yourself on a lot of these things and live with, okay, that maybe you're not going to be really world class in one thing, but you become a generalist in knowing the discipline. Even in my world, in world of software, I have to know even just a little bit about what software tools we're buying and what are they doing and what purpose are they serving, because those tend to be the most expensive tools as well, or how to read an AWS bill. And because that can get very complicated, can be 20 to 30 pages long. And you have to understand what all of these things means and charges. And so then you spend time with your engineering leader, you spend time with your DevOps team, et cetera, and have to understand really every item on the invoice in order to understand what that final number is. And so you find yourself in constant discussions, constant conversations, and sometimes you just go to your leader and say, can you actually educate me more on why we need this and what problem we're trying to solve and what should we be looking for? And then hopefully with having done this more than once, or when it's a renewal time, you won't have to do as much, but you remember what purpose it serves.
Yeah. And you've got things like CapEx versus OpEx and where you need to play that game, right? Depending upon what your financial strategy is, not necessarily in the technology acquisition, but things like office furniture for people's home offices now because everybody's working from home, right? Where does that play into the equation? What are we doing with real estate and real estate leases and probably some incentives associated with it. And I was just talking to somebody in corporate travel the other day about this, about the fact that things like we used to T&E a bunch of Zip and Uber rides because we were in metropolitan downtown in San Francisco, a place like that. Now everybody's living in the suburbs and the ground transportation is just moving from from Uber and from Lyft to black car services, taking people to airports so they can go out and travel, right? So
Yep.
so there's a lot of moving parts that
Absolutely.
that go
And in
into
this market, in that market, to that point, at least versus buy, it's coming back to the question of the real estate because of the way the
perfect
real
example.
estate prices are going.
Yeah.
And you think, especially some of the markets we operate in, like New York and San Francisco, the prices are not going down. So if you think about it, we need a building for the next 5 years. And if you have the capital, maybe that is one of the ways to use that capital. And so there's a lot you have to wait in. It's not just what's the best terms, but it's like, what are the other options? Do we have other
Yeah.
options? And lease versus buy is certainly one of those topics.
One of the most interesting strategies, and I tell people this every chance that I see, is the financial strategy associated with offsetting long-term real estate leases, right? And the way that there's something that's really, really creative out there that not a lot of people know about, which is media barter and corporate trade in the media barter space. So organizations like Active International, who happens to also be a sponsor of Procurement Foundry, Active International offers media barter against dead assets or depreciating assets, where they'll take assets off your financial books and they'll convert them into media buying, which you need for marketing and advertising anyway. So you're solving budgetary issues for your marketing department while eliminating dead assets off the asset tables for finance directors, all with, you're killing two birds with one stone with one solution by doing media barter trade through companies like Active International. And that's where you get, you get triple bonus points for thinking outside of the box when you bring those types of things to the table. And I'm just speaking from experience, and I'm sure Yvonne will tell you as well. Finance guys love it when procurement people bring ideas like that to the table, whether they're going to use them or not. The fact that you're even thinking that way, you're a keeper, because you're starting to think in their mindset as much as, okay, I got to go hammer this this vendor down on their widget price. You're actually starting to understand what the financial mechanisms are that are driving the decision-making process. And when you can take dead assets off of asset tables and move them to viable media buying strategies, things like that are triple bonus for you.
Absolutely.
So Jim asked a question around lease financing as a complement to the company's capital structure to transfer risk obligation to the lender from a technology and highly depreciating assets. Are you deploying a lot of that strategy, or where are you at? Because I know every company and every CFO is different, right?
Yeah, we're not, because we don't, the only leases we have that are long-term leases are rent, are on our
Right.
office space. So other than that, not in our business. So not something I spend too much time thinking about. The only, I would caveat that by saying that we're been struggling with supply chain issues, as you all know better than me. In the last year or even 2 years, probably 2.5 years since really pandemic began, we've had these issues. Computers. So we're constantly trying to find a solution, and buying computers is now, it can take us 2 to 3 months. And so that's an issue that we might see new technologies emerge and new ways of using that.
That's another one that I don't want to sound like a broken record, but another one that, and I listen, procurement, just so everybody understands, Procurement Foundry is vendor agnostic. We have partners like Zip and like all the other partners, but we are vendor agnostic. But I will share this: Park Place is a Procurement Foundry partner, a permanent residence partner. Park Place is a company that does maintenance and repair and third-party OEM maintenance on your network and on your hardware gear. Park Place also is sitting on a massive repository of refurbished, low-cost secondhand equipment. if you're not backing that into your strategy associated with capital acquisition of equipment right now, because of the length of time needed to get a new Cisco router in or a new, edge device in or something like that, you need to be thinking about that from procurement and a supply chain perspective. And if you're in finance as well, you might be wanting to think about that now. And the reason why is because it's going to take you 6 months to 9 months to get a new Cisco SKU in the house when you can deploy this thing. It's the same concept as, hey, I got to get an engineer a laptop tomorrow so that you can start coding and start building something out, right? So one of the things that I'm seeing based on supply chain issues is a massive demand in the secondary refurbished market for gear, right? And also, I'm sure you're doing this now as well. You're thinking about this from a finance perspective, and your IT or your IT partner in the IT space is thinking about, hey, I got to move my life cycle of my desktops of my engineers from 36 months to 48 months. So what do I have to do to keep the maintenance cycles up? Because we just can't get the gear. Like, it's not available, right? So
Yep.
I want to be cognizant of time. We got about 10 minutes left. Thank you for the questions so far. I want to talk a little bit about looking forward now. So you're managing this thing right now, but you're almost at, and we talked about this, you're almost at the point where you're ready to start thinking about spinning up a procurement department, right? So I know you talked about maybe doing this later this year, mid-year, or maybe even Q3. What's going through your head from a finance perspective and from a finance director perspective as you start to think about, okay, I need to start bringing in some dedicated resources? What's the timetable? How big is the company? And what types of people are you looking to staff to meet your needs?
Yeah, that's a great question. Again, goes back to what problem are we trying to solve. One thing I've noticed in the past 12 months here at Webflow is that people that were starting things, building things, oftentimes from scratch, new departments, new teams, etc., doing their own procurement a lot of the times because they might also be more familiar than I am. What's a good terms on like tools like Jira, etc., because they've bought them before. And I've noticed that they're generally financially responsible, and so but they're spending a lot of time doing that process. And so we are looking to offload them because we didn't hire our head of engineering to negotiate Jira contract. We hired our head of engineering to run engineering department and hire engineers.
Right, exactly.
So it's exactly the role. It was not never in a job description, but I've noticed that it was a real pain. And so let's bring a professional was our first call. And when we were talking about the types of people we need, I think that is very common at a startup. You're looking for builders. You're looking for people that can start things, they can build things, build the foundations, also being able to operate on their own for a period of time. Sometimes you don't have you can't start the team because you want to prove the value to the business, especially in the business that didn't have it. And then as that value is proven, then we say, well, okay, now we know what the value is. How can we increase the ROI? Or how can we accelerate even more things? Because we know we can do 2 more buyers here, and we can do even more, take on even more. And also from budgetary perspective, you look at what's the spend under management and what's ROI would be. So I think for procurement, I think of it very analytically, that you can put numbers to it. Unlike some other functions, it's very difficult, even within finance, to put a specific number to those things. And so, but yeah, we're definitely looking for somebody that's built this before, but the building type.
I love that. That adjective of builder, right? I think it's fantastic, which is, hey, listen, you need to be in a builder mindset. And by the way, I'm hiring you to build this out. I need you to be self-sustaining and not to be able to be coming to my desk every 5 minutes and asking me what the question. Like, I need you to be self-sufficient, work on your own. I need you to be a cultural fit into my organization because everybody's running around with their hair on fire as we're growing this thing out. And more importantly, they need to be able to build the business case and prove their value back to you. I think one of the things that happens a lot when people come to organizations like yourself is they want to try to boil the ocean all in the first 90 or 120 days. And what you've told me through our discussion is it's much more of a, hey, listen, just show me the steady increase and show me that you can continue to grow and expand with us as we start to expand. I love the concept of builder. And I've never heard it said that way. But I like the idea of saying, okay, I'm looking for somebody to build something for me you have to have a proven track record of being able to build teams, show value, think outside of the box, and be able to be flexible with us, because God knows what's getting thrown at us in 24 months.
Yeah.
Amazing stuff. Okay, a couple more questions while I have you. Inside of procurement right now, it's really, really big on sustainability and supply diversity and inclusion and things like those. Those are other topics that are happening inside of procurement right now. Is that something that you're aware of, but it's not the priority? This is right in our wheelhouse, and we have to think about that as well when you're starting as a finance director and you're running operations? Or are you saying, hey, listen, I'm going to hold off on that until I get that builder in place, and then I'm going to let them worry about that?
Yeah, at our stage, probably we don't worry about that aspect too much. We tend to just ask ourselves, is that what would accelerate things? So I definitely know it matters in the long run, because we really worry about how these tools work together, and do we have also dangerous, the reliance on one big supplier, one big company, like one big ERP system, because you can also find yourself not operating fast enough. So yeah, I would say that's something we think about, but in growth stage, maybe not the top 3 priority.
In your world where you're doing engineering and technology development work, and that's your business that you're in, from a sourcing perspective right now, what is the biggest challenge that you have?
I think it's scaling the company is our big priority. And so do we have suppliers that can scale with us? So we know what the speed of the business is. Roughly, it goes back to the growth of the revenue, because tend to grow in line with the growth in headcount, sometimes behind, sometimes ahead, depending on how you're investing your capital. And so you think about, okay, so if the business continues to move at 80% or 40% or whatever that pace of the business is, can our tech stack scale as well? And that becomes one of the key questions.
Yeah, because you can't rip down and start again, right? It's okay to build off of things that you already have, but making an error early on and having to rip down your tech stack and start all over again once you're 36, 48 months in is just a scary proposition.
Absolutely. It's like making the wrong hire. It's very painful and can set you back 2 years sometimes.
All right, so here's what I'm going to do, Yvonne. I've got no less than 8 procurement strategies that we've talked about today in this conversation that I was just writing down as we we're going. I want to recap them, and then I want to ask you, what's the one takeaway you think people need to take away from this? If they're sitting in your shoes, they're in a hypergrowth startup, doesn't need to be tech-based, but obviously that's your experience. What is the one takeaway that you think is most important for the people that are listening in today? And I'm going to run through them really quickly. So the first thing you mentioned was start early. Don't wait until you're a 500 million shop to start thinking about reining in the folks, because behavior modification of bad children is worse than teaching good behavior to young children, right? Don't inhibit profitability was another one that you said, which is make sure that you're not in a hindrance or creating roadblocks to profitability, which will make you think more about adding to the top line versus the bottom line. Make sure that you work at the speed of business, which is you are contributing to the acceleration versus the deceleration of the business. Be very, very aware of tech debt, right? Because you don't want to, you got to be able to clean your house out on a regular basis and make sure that you're flushing that out, which I think lends itself to trying to sign shorter contracts than larger contracts when you're at this stage of the game, because you just don't know what the future holds. You can't see around the curve as much, right? Try to buy for today by keeping an eye on the future. So making sure that your vendor population is scalable, which then again feeds into the 1 year versus 3 year thing. Make sure you know who your directly responsible individual is, and make sure that if that person leaves, find another person to apply that to inside of your organization, so you're not running around playing tag in the dark when these things renew. Time management through automation is a key to success when you're this big in this path. So certainly take a look at investing in automation tools. Zip could be one of them, right? But working in parallel is another one. Leverage your finance. I hope you like this. Leverage your finance mojo, your finance people. You need to understand, you understand finance better than anybody else. Understand what's happening in inflation, understand what your cost of capital is, understand what's happening from an OpEx and a CapEx perspective. Look at things like lease financing as a way to deplete risk. Look at things like corporate trade barter services and things like that, right? When it comes to the point where you're starting to build this thing out, think about hiring builders, right? So those are 9 procurement strategies for CFOs and finance directors that we just covered in 50 minutes. Thank you so much for that. I'll come back to the question, which of all the things that we talked about today, what is one takeaway that you want to leave everybody with that you think is important for them to start with tomorrow?
I would summarize in one sentence: accelerate and get out of the way.
Nice. Accelerate and get out of the way.
Yeah.
All right. Well, you heard it from Yvonne. Yvonne, thank you so much. I'd love to have you back sometime and see how everything's going with you. I really appreciate you giving us the time in this brain dump. I'm definitely going to aggregate all of my notes here and put it out onto a post on LinkedIn so everybody gets to see this. Tons of stuff in here, folks. 1 hour, exactly 60 minutes. We covered tons of things. There's at least 10 golden nuggets in here. If you're a finance director or a CFO, or even if you're an early stage procurement person that's coming in the gate and you need to build that relationship with your finance peer or your stakeholder in finance, lots of insights into how they think here today. Yvonne, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it, my friend. And thanks to Zip for providing us with the zipper lane. I really appreciate that. If you have more questions for Zip and their product set, please feel free to reach out to them inside of Procurement Foundry. They're tagged on the LinkedIn post. And if you have any questions, you can reach out to Tina and I about Zip as well. All right. Thank you, Yvonne. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, everyone. Take care. Have a great day. Bye-bye.